Welcome to the presentation on how APDS will transform your operations, presented by the International Parking and Mobility Institute and the Alliance for Parking Data Standards. Sharing data is a necessity in a connected world, and entities expend significant effort and cost to share basic data. What drives these costs? Mainly the use of different terms and formats to store and send data. And standards, if employed, will make it easier to create, share, and integrate data, making it easier for the parking industry to communicate internally as well as with external stakeholders and partners. So wouldn't it be great to have a common method to share data between your technology platforms with other parties and with other industries? And that is the reason for the Alliance for Parking Data Standards. Today, we are going to provide you insights into the effort to create a parking data standard and some of the current efforts that are underway from around the globe. Joining me are Mike King, the Parking Technology and Infrastructure Manager in the City of Sacramento, California, United States, and Richard Elliott, the Head of Local Planning and Infrastructure City Policy with the City of Manchester, United Kingdom. Mike and Richard, thank you for joining me, and could each of you provide a quick introduction of yourselves, starting with Mike?
Certainly. Thank you, Mike. I'm Mike King. As Mike mentioned, I'm the Parking Technology and Infrastructure Manager for the City of Sacramento in California in the United States. We are a full-service parking organization. We have over 6,000 parking spaces on street. The city owns about 4,500 off-street parking spaces, and we manage over 30,000 parking spaces for other entities within the City of Sacramento. We use a lot of varying systems to help us in our jobs, to try to make us more efficient. And it's necessary for us to have these various systems communicating with each other in order to be able to provide the services that we provide.
And Richard Elliott.
Hello. My name is Richard Elliott, and I'm the Head of Local Planning and Infrastructure in Manchester in the northwest of the United Kingdom. Manchester is a city of around about 560,000 inhabitants. We're the main commercial and retail centre for the northwest of England. Parking plays a really important part in the economy of the city, and it is important for us that parking is seen by people as something that's easy to use, that they can access with the minimum of inconvenience. And we're really keen to try and make information about parking availability available to as many people as possible, as easily as possible, as part of our overall offer to the citizens of our city.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you, gentlemen, both for joining me today. As we said, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the Alliance for Parking Data Standards, the efforts to create a data standard, and then we're going to talk through some specific examples of how data standards are being used globally to promote the interaction between the parking industry and other services. 20 years ago, it was quite easy to connect a parking facility to the consumers. You just had to stand out on the street and waving a flag to direct parkers in. But now, over the last 10 years, it's become a little bit more complicated. We have people that have connected vehicles or using their personal computers to access, looking for parking and information, or using their phone. And with that increase in complexity, there have been a lot more people and entities that are engaged in getting that information to the consumers. And each of those data lines represents another data interface or connection that needs to be performed. And it's not just within the parking industry. The information is being shared within the parking industry to other entities such as toll roads, shopping complexes, entertainment districts, and the intelligent transportation systems that we all interact with. So the need for data sharing is growing both within the industry and externally to the industry. And it is for that reason that the European Parking Association the British Parking Association, and International Parking and Mobility Institute joined together to form the creation of the Alliance for Parking Data Standards. The objective of this alliance was to create a not-for-profit collaboration to work with internal stakeholders to the parking industry as well as external stakeholders to the parking industry, such as intelligent transportation systems, automotive OEMs, and the mobility as a service providers that were all looking to access the data. The Alliance for Parking Data Standards is not involved in revenue or data control or data aggregation. The pure intent of the Alliance for Parking Data Standards is to enable faster and easier sharing of relevant parking data within and outside of the industry. So in essence, or in summary, the goal is just to create a common language for which to share data within and outside of the industry. The approach for the Alliance has been, over the last 2 years, one of wide consultation. We are in our third phase of a working group. The first two have creating the basis core of the standard. And to date, we have involved or engaged over 500 organizations that have requested the most recent release of the standard. And this includes participation with the Australian, the Brazilian, the Canadian, and the Japanese parking associations. The desire of APDS is to develop a common data definition and data associations to define parking and mobility activities. This will enable the parking industry and its activities to more effectively integrate with other standards that are out there. The goal of APDS is not to create an alternative data standard, rather it is to collaborate with many of the other data standards that are already in use across the globe, and to leverage common structures in those standards where possible. To that end, APDS has openly sought input from other organizations to improve the standards and their applications. To see the work that's been done today, and which was started in about 2017, to date, the APDS has created data standards for place data elements, rates, occupancy. In the second phase, which is released in May 2020, it included rights, sessions, and observations. And currently, the data standard, or the working groups, are working on messaging formats and financial transactions. As you can see, the first two phases have created the basis to support curbside management activities. And we are also engaged in supporting the automotive OEM's interest in developing automated valet parking. The information that's generated in an information standard includes an overview, information model documents, a data dictionary document, as well as use cases. And APDS is excited to announce that we are in the process of adoption as an official ISO standard sometime in the next several months. All of this would not be possible, though, without our key sponsors that have been supporting and heavily engaged in the development of these standards. So we would like to thank these individuals and entities specifically for their participation and support as we work to create a data standard to support the industry and to integrate the industry with other service providers. So with that, let's go into some of our panelists' questions around the use of data standards and how they apply. Our first question, and we'll lead it with Mike King. Mike, can you describe the importance of sharing data in the management of a city?
Certainly. Thank you, Mike. The City of Sacramento currently has 30 systems that create or consume data while performing specific functions for parking services. This includes parking meter and payment systems, permit systems, inventory systems, vendor control and programming systems, compliance systems, security systems, and work order systems. In addition, we are planning 7 new systems. In many cases, multiple systems are affecting the same assets. For example, a given on-street parking space, the meter will collect payments, such using coins or bank cards, as well as will the mobile payment system. The work order system will track maintenance activities, the compliance system will track citations and warnings, and the on-street reservation system tracks the times when the curb space is set aside for non-parking uses. Similarly, for a single off-street parking location, we have the parks that is accepting payments, the event reservation system that is pre-selling spaces, and the work order system, again, tracking maintenance activities. Many of the 30 systems exchange small subsets of data amongst themselves using custom APIs that were built on a case-by-case basis. But there still are a significant number of manual processes to transfer the data from one system to another. And that, of course, requires redundant data entry points and report generation. Our business continues to grow, and our goal is to automate as many processes as possible. We are requiring that all new systems that are implemented must be able to share data with other systems, those that we already have and those that we may acquire in the future. For example, if we obtain a new on-street payment system, it should be able to learn the locations, the hours, the rates, and so forth, all from the on-street inventory management system. Today, if we add a new meter on street, we have to add it to the on-street inventory system, to the appropriate meter vendor's system, to the mobile payment system, to the citation system, to the automated license plate recognition system, to the public-facing parking search system, and the electronic lock system. There is no reason these systems can't be integrated such that updating the inventory to show the space now has a meter and its operating parameters will cause the information to be propagated automatically to the other systems. Reporting is just as challenging. If the parking manager asks the accounting team, how did we do yesterday? It can take several days to several weeks, depending on the scope, to download reports from each of the individual systems, then use Excel tools to combine the numbers to produce a summary report.
Thanks, Mike. So as you can see, a lot of importance in sharing data within your system just to find those efficiencies and effectiveness. Richard, how about in Manchester? What are some of the importance of sharing data in your city?
Yeah, I was just going to broaden it out a little bit, I think, and just talk in principle about the importance of this. I think cities are complicated entities, and managing them is a really complicated task. So it's important that city government has access to as much information about the way in which the city is being used as possible. And historically, we've not been very good at that. We've not been very good at having real-time data about how cities are being used. But by having better data, we can understand how the city needs to change, how the pressures on different parts of the city are changing and developing. And that applies acutely to parking, but it applies to other issues as well, such as energy management, traffic more generally, obviously. But it's not just about government either. It's also about citizens and the ability of citizens to be able to use a city, to be able to understand how it works, to understand its key services better. And it's really important that data is made available to citizens. And parking is another key example of that, where historically, as you say, people's knowledge of parking is probably based on what they normally have done, whereas through sharing data, making data more readily available, we can provide a much richer picture of what parking is available, where, its cost, and we can help also to see parking as very much part of an overall mobility management system. But that's really only possible if the data is freely available and shared, which is why we're so excited to be party to this whole project. Thank you.
That's interesting, Richard. Thanks. Yeah. So being able to share that data will help your citizens better utilize the services and understand how they can maybe change their patterns to make their lives better versus what you said, just doing what they did yesterday. Exactly. Richard, if then follow that up, what are some of the challenges that you've had in sharing data prior to your work with APDS?
Well, I mean, there are a number of challenges really with this in the past. I mean, organisations and and holders of data aren't always particularly keen to release it. They sometimes see it as being something that's theirs and has value to themselves, and haven't necessarily seen previously the benefit of making that more readily available. There's been issues around format of data and ensuring that data is provided in the right format for people to be able to make sense of it. And that's something else that we've been working on here. And creating the platforms, the user-friendly platforms that enable data not just to be data, but something that is actually meaningful to people and they can use, has been a challenge in the past, which we've been working through as part of this project. And finally, I think one of the issues around data is that we have to acknowledge the fact that there are important issues around personal confidentiality and the way in which data is accessed and collected raises issues in people's minds about the importance of that being secure and safe. So we have to make sure that any system that we have complies with all of those requirements and is transparently safe for people to use. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Richard. The compliance of personal accessing that data and using it. I know that's becoming a global concern everywhere on how to control that. Mike, you spent a lot of time talking about your use of data to kind of improve the internal operations as well as supporting the outside. What are some of the challenges that you have in sharing data within some of your own operations? I know you mentioned bringing together lots of different technologies that you are using within your city operations.
Certainly. The challenges are actually very similar to what Richard described. Our biggest issue is getting all the entities to export and import the data in consistent formats. Whether it's a case of reporting a payment or a change in occupancy status, each vendor does so in a different way. When we direct a pair of vendors to share specific data elements, the vendors often have to negotiate whose APIs are going to be used, usually resulting in costs to the city for development of a new API by one vendor or another.
Yeah, that's a good point. And one of the things I know that the Alliance for Parking Data Standards has been very focused on trying to do is to come up with a common structure to reduce some of those costs and to speed up the work and innovation that each of your cities are trying to implement. What are your expectations of technology providers and partners to share data and to use a common data standard? I think, Richard, you kind of commented on this as one of your challenges. Can you go into maybe a little bit more detail what you are expecting or the city of Manchester is expecting going forward?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't so much something that's come out of our work on parking specifically, but a couple of years ago, we were fortunate enough to be the UK demonstration city for the rollout of Internet of Things technology in Manchester. And we had a program that ran for about 18 months to 2 years. Working with a whole range of large corporates as well as small SMEs and public sector organizations to explore the use of Internet of Things technology in relation to health applications, transport applications, building management applications. And one of the things that we really found as a result of that it was really important that we tried to put in place some clear expectations in relation to the use of that data. And we created through it an overall city platform. Now, some of this has kept going after the demonstration project, some of it hasn't. But out of it, we are using the basis of our learning from that to refresh our own strategy for digital technology in the city. And one of the things that we're wanting to do as part of that is to adopt a set of principles. And one of those is that if people want to do business with the city, and ideally in the city, then they have to sign up to some of those principles. And one of those is the sharing of open data and the making use of data that's collected about the city in an open way. I won't say that the principles that we've adopted are unique and our own in title. We learned a lot from work we've been doing with the city of Eindhoven in the Netherlands on this, who have themselves adopted a very clear charter in relation to data principles. And we thought that was something that we're wanting to embed in our own activity in Manchester.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Is to encourage the use or to work with the city to commit to sharing that data, because in the end it is likely the city's data and the citizens' data as well. Mike, how about you? As again, I know in the city of Sacramento, you have many different technology providers that are supporting your operations. What are your expectations of your providers and partners to share data?
So for all of the contracts with vendors of parking technology, the city initially establishes that the city is the owner of all the data that the vendor produces, processes, receives, or whatever on behalf of the city. We make that very clear up front that they're a custodian of the data, but they do not own the data. The city does. Further, all of our contracts require that those vendors must share the data in the manner that we require, whether it's sharing it with another vendor so that vendor can complete its required operations or functions for the city, or whether it's just sharing it directly with the city. We also expect for the vendor to provide data for our open data portal. We do discover that we're sometimes having challenges with that, which is one of the reasons that we're hoping that APDS is going to be a significant way to ease those challenges and get that open sharing going.
Oh, thank you. So I think those are two fantastic examples that people participating in this this session can take away, is to define your principles for your city on your expectations of doing business with the city and what that means, and then Sacramento is doing is giving those specific requirements and defining here is what you will do to live up to those principles. So, two very good examples, I think, of how to ensure that the data is shared and is open to everyone. Mike, I know you were going to go into some of your projects, but maybe can you describe some of the specific uses you have of data within your operations today?
Absolutely, Mike. So one of the issues is providing the locations, the rates, the operating hours, exceptions, and other configuration data for our on-street parking spaces to various entities, the meter vendor, the electronic lock vendor, and the mobile payment vendors. Right now, our team has to do it by filling out spreadsheets with various columns, which is tedious and, as I mentioned before, kind of redundant in the data entry. Similarly, pushing locations, rates, operating hours, and the facility characteristics of our off-street locations to the parks, the meter vendors, the mobile payment vendors, and so forth. The other one is getting or receiving transaction-related data from all of the vendors to the city's accounting systems to help us with our reporting and our reconciliation. Another use is pushing the data from our various meter and payment systems to our enforcement systems. That helps automate the process so that when payments are made, the enforcement systems are already aware of it, and officers don't have to look for lights or payment decals or other indications that a car is parked in compliance of the various regulations. And then finally, another example is providing data to the various entities who are using our inventory and our occupancy data to help drivers find available parking and to make reservations.
All right. And Richard, how about you? What are some of the specific uses that you have as well in Manchester?
Yeah, very similar to Mike in some ways, not perhaps as well developed in others, but the key thing that we've been able to do already is to create this common platform that off-street and on-street parking spaces are well, they're all defined on it, and you can put in a postcode or an address in the city into the system, and you can immediately find out what parking is available nearby. The functionality exists to enable the number of vacant spaces to be made available there as well as the price. So as a system that enables us to communicate with our customers, that's really important. Now we are then going to add to that a payment portal, and that's work that's in progress at the moment. And we've been working in collaboration with the Department for Transport in the UK on these things. So the idea will be that you'll be able to reserve your space and do that before you set off, and you'll know what you're going to be paying and where you're going to be heading for in terms of your car park. It's not just parking that we're wanting to consider this for, though. We've got some other applications in relation to the use of our city. We have a real-time set of systems that look at air quality in the city, in different parts of the city, that we're making available to people and to citizens. And we've also been trialing a piece of technology which is fitted to cycles, people's cycle lights, that enable us, as a result of the messages that gives back, both to track where people are needing to cycle, where they're wanting to cycle, but it's also got a functionality in it that enables them to test if the road has got bad potholes and is in need of repair. So that triggers back to our engineering department and our city highways department. So there's a number of areas, I think, where all this sort of thing is really exciting in the management of the city.
And I believe both of you, in just a couple minutes here, are going to talk a little more detail about the specific projects you have going on. But I think, Richard, that's fantastic to kind of share. It's not just about sharing where parking exists in the world, but it's also collecting that information and categorizing it in a useful way so that it provides more useful information to the city and its operating groups and safety groups, as well as to other industries that may need that.
Yeah.
For the final question, before we go into your projects, what are the future desired uses and applications of data sharing that you have for the next 5 to 10 years for each of your cities, starting with Mike?
So in the future, our systems will be bookended by the inventory systems and the data warehouse, which will collect a lot of the transactional and revenue information. And everything else in between will pretty much be a pipeline. There will be a single payment system for all services that do not include the individual parking sessions. So people will continue to pay at meters or in the garages, but we have a lot of other places where we need to accept funds. So we're going to try to consolidate into a single payment system to be able to capture all the payment information in one location. More importantly, however, though, any data that is to be entered or manipulated by a person will be touched only once, and then it should be shared automatically with all the other systems that need to act upon that data. Whether the data is an update to the inventory, the recognition of a payment or a reservation, or granting or revocation of a permit, or processing a work order. Because we expect all of our systems to communicate with each other, all future procurements will state in the RFP that the vendor is expected to comply with the APDS ISO standards that once they are adopted.
Ah, fantastic. And Richard, how about yourself? What are your future desired uses for data sharing? What do you see coming on the horizon?
Well, I've mentioned before, I think the payment portal that we're developing is the next step on the road for this in terms of our parking work. But I think what we want to aim for really is, as part of the overall mobility as a service offer that we develop, people have access to a complete end-to-end experience of making a journey within the city, be that to a car park or be that on public transportation, and be it by some other means, be it on a bike or on foot, so that people have the best possible information about the city and how it works. One of the concepts as part of that we're exploring is the use of mobility hubs on the periphery of the city centre, so that people can use those and then connect to potentially a bike hire scheme or connect onto some other form of transportation. So I think what we want to do really is to use the work that we've been doing around parking and the parking platform and see that as a key part of a future mobility as a service offer to people in the city.
Ah, that's fantastic. That's really interesting. It was actually great to hear both of you talk about, I think, two key valuable points of data sharing and the use of data in all of our lives. You know, Mike, you brought up the idea of touching data once and then letting the systems communicate. I mean, that is a gigantic value, especially one where we have so many systems interacting in it, and it can be sometimes overwhelming for a consumer to try to figure out what to do, as well as our own operating staffs trying to make sure all the data connects. And then Richard, I think everyone in the world is very interested in how does, parking is not the end all be all. It is, as you said, a step in the journey of someone traveling from point A to point B, and then providing people the various options of how they can interact with that data to accomplish their journey is just so valuable. So thank you both, gentlemen, for sharing and answering those questions. What I'd like to do now is to allow each of you to talk a little bit more about what each of your cities are doing with data, and what I have found to be quite innovative. So Mike King, if you wouldn't mind describing a little bit about the city of Sacramento.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. So within the city of Sacramento, we are a full service parking management organization, not only managing the assets owned by the city, but under contract to various private entities, we are managing their parking spaces for them. In some cases, it's as little as simply providing enforcement, which drives up compliance, to full cycle management. We sell the permits, we manage and take care of the facility itself. We collect revenue. We provide reports to management on operations and so forth. So it is a full blown service. We do handle the parking enforcement for the entire city. We manage essentially the curb for the city of Sacramento. We deal with parking management for events, and that can be both on and off street, particularly for the events where we have set up a reservation system that allows somebody to purchase their parking prior to arrival so that they will know where they will be parking, as opposed to arriving at the event venue and then going off in search for parking. And we are constantly deploying innovative technology for the city. We have over the years, I apologize, the city was established in 1849. Our first parking meter was installed in 1944. We have been directed through various efforts by council to be very aggressive in our parking modernization. As a result, we have introduced a significant number of automated tools that produce or consume data, or both, for the city's parking system, and we have more projects in the pipeline. Next slide shows many of those innovations starting in about 2006, going through last year, and the next slide will show what we're currently working on, which includes more tools to make ourselves more efficient. Our efforts so far to date have actually been have yielded well. Due to some of our pricing programs, we have found compliance is going up, and citation issuance has gone down about the same amount, primarily due to the system that we introduced that allow people to pay for to stay for longer periods of time. We no longer say, well, it's a 2-hour zone, you must leave after 2 hours. We now allow people to stay longer, although they will have to pay a little bit more. But about 5% of the people are taking advantage of that, and that has reduced our citation issuance by about 5%. We started at 34 managed lot locations, and as you saw, we're now up to over 60. For our event parking system, we have 25 certified partners, meaning that when somebody goes online to find a parking space for an event, it's not necessarily at a city facility. It could be any facility, and market pricing drives the rates, which is a win for the consumer. We've had over, and this slide actually is a little bit older. It says 20,000 or 200,000 reservations. It's actually well over 300,000 reservations now. And we average over 24 events per month, of course, not during the COVID crisis, but prior to that, between event games such as basketball games and concerts and so forth, that event center was pretty busy. And we also extended our operating hours, so we've had close to $400,000. I'm sorry, close to 400,000 paid meter transactions after 6 p.m., which was a significant change for us.
Oh, so you're saying that as people started to learn more about your operations and what was available, they actually started to access and use it more. Is that
Yes,
correct?
absolutely. Right. Used to be that the parking shut down at 6 p.m. every night, but once there were events going on, we needed to further control the curb and make sure that there would be sufficient traffic lanes available, that people would be able to access various locations and so forth. So that's why we introduced the event system, and we extended parking hours till 10 p.m. so that we would be able to properly control that.
How do people in your community get the information for your different services? Is it a city website? Is it partner apps? I see you have 25 certified partners, so I assume that they're also providing information to their customers.
That is correct. So we have a location called reserve.sacpark.org. During normal operations and normal times, that would actually, for every event that is going on in the city, would list the various locations that are selling parking for that event, along with the price and any information that the consumer might need to know about the location. Of course, distance to the venue, as well as operating hours and so forth. And that would then allow the consumer to choose between the various locations. Not only do they see a list, but they can also see a map, so they can actually view where they would be parking in relationship to the event location. They can then prepay, and then they will receive a confirmation of the reservation that gives them the address to plug into their GPS so that they can go directly to their parking venue. Also on the city's website in the sacpark.org area are information regarding other locations, as well as about street parking, hours of operation, costs for meters, and so forth, to help people find alternatives if they choose not to use the event reservation system, or when it's not an event going on, they are still able then to find the various both on and off street locations for parking.
Oh, very interesting. Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome. So our model is, as I mentioned before, we're going to bookend between the inventory system and the data warehouse. So the inventory system will feed into our meter and payment systems, our enforcement systems, our wayfinding and reservation systems, as well as some of the other systems that we use to manage our various parking locations. All of those systems are expected to feed into the data warehouse for the various transactions that are occurring. And in some cases, the data warehouse will be feeding back to the other systems. For example, if a payment is made at a meter, then that information is going to be sent to the enforcement systems to update them about the payment so that they know that the vehicle has parking rights. For example, if somebody makes a mobile payment where we are in a pay-by-plate situation, that plate will appear in both the officer's handhelds as well as the ALPR system, so that the vehicles and the handhelds recognize that that owner's car is actually paid for at that particular parking location at the time. An example of how this automation is improving our operations: it used to take over 45 minutes for an officer just to scan a lot to make sure that all the vehicles were in compliance. With the ALPR, it's under 4 minutes for the scanning process.
Wow, that's fantastic stuff. How far along do you think you are on implementing this design?
So the inventory systems have been around for several years. However, we are planning to augment them, and a lot of that augmentation is going to be along the lines of the way that APDS is defined, the structures in defining an off-street location versus an on-street location. The data warehouse, right now, we are in the process of developing a proof of concept to show that indeed we actually can receive the data from these various entities and then properly disseminate it to the other entities that need it. Once that proof of concept is completed and we have shown that we can successfully do this, we will then be proceeding to acquire a full-blown data warehouse and or develop it in-house. Our IT team, the city's IT team, is responsible for making those decisions, but they are leading that charge and will determine what path we will go for that. We have provided the requirements on what we need as far as the data to be consumed and or provided to the other systems. And the next step actually be after the development of the data warehouse is making sure that all the vendors do fall into compliance with the APDS and the concept of providing the data to us so that we can forward it along to the other partners who may need it for their operations.
Fascinating stuff, Mike. Thanks. It's great to see the city of Sacramento and how they're pushing the envelope.
Thank you.
Similarly, Richard, if you could provide some insight into what the city of Manchester doing, which I think is just as interesting, and it really has engaged a lot of the third-party service providers as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yes, well, just a little bit of background to start with. As I mentioned in opening, I work for the City of Manchester, which is one of 10 metropolitan boroughs in the wider city region of Greater Manchester. So the population of the city is around about 560,000 people. The wider city region has a population of almost 3 million. We sit right at the heart of the Northwest, which in turn, there's something like 11 million people within around about an hour and a half's drive of the city. So we have a very large catchment, and we sit, as I say, at the heart of a major urban area. We have, as well as a very large commuter market, and something like 150,000 jobs in our city centre. We have a very major retail centre here and a whole range of entertainment venues. It's certainly been our policy over many years to try as far as possible to encourage as many people to travel to the centre of the city by means other than the car, but the car still remains a very important part of the overall economy. Our parking has changed hugely over the last 15 years. We were a city that suffered a lot at the back end of the 20th century from depopulation and deindustrialization. A lot of sites became used temporarily as parking for a time, but have now, in many cases, been redeveloped. So parking's changed, but we still have something of the order of 30,000 off-street public spaces in and around the city centre. The council itself owns 5,500 of those in 14 car parks. We're also responsible for the management of on-street spaces, but you'll see from those statistics that there are a lot of car parks in the city and close to the city centre that aren't within our direct ownership. And one of the challenges has been to try and introduce systems that enable those to be managed as a whole and to provide information about the availability of parking as a whole, rather than simply those car parks that we directly control. So the project that we've been involved in has got two quite distinct phases. The first one was all around making data available and making information about our car parks more publicly available. So we've used this project as a means of road testing the APDS standards and developing the standard messaging. We set out right at the outset about trying to involve as many of the suppliers as we could in this, and we had a principle that we would publish open data in relation to parking and create an online platform that's accessible to everybody. And that we did with help from our partners. So there is now an online portal that you can go to, and as said earlier, you can type in the part of the city that you want to visit. You can then have as much information as we've been able to include in this together in one place, and it's available easily for people to access online. So the key part of this has been sort of putting together the data providers and the data publishers and creating that common platform of parking information. The
And
second
just
phase,
I was just going to say, just as a clarity for some of the folks that may not be familiar, NCP and Q Park are large parking management companies in Manchester. And then the Parkopedia, Just Park, and other providers are more of those consumer services that consumers would access to find, search for, and find parking. Is that a good
correct.
summary of that?
That's right. Yeah, that's correct. Yep, yep. So the second phase is what we're about to embark on, and this is all around trying to extend that functionality to bring in multi-vendor payments and allowing motorists a choice of payment providers, but enabling people to pay for their car parking in one place online. And the whole idea is that we use the basis of the work that we've done to date to continue to bring together those data providers and the end users and the service providers through the creation of this platform. So we're really excited about this development, which we think will be of real benefit to people, and potentially it's capable of being extended into other areas of our transport network as well at some point in the future. Just move on. So this is just a visualization, really. If you go on to, I think it's the Parkopedia website. This is the information that you see. You can, as I say, you can put in an address within the city, and you get the full range of parking options available to you in one place, along with the charge. And move on to the next one. Yeah, I mean that's just that the intention of this as well is that not only can you see where the car parking spaces are, but you also get information immediately on availability. One of the challenges that we have in the city is, in the past, certainly a lot of the congestion issues in the city centre can often be a function of people just driving around trying to find a space in a fairly unproductive way. So the more information we can make availability and the best route to take to the car park, that also is a major advantage to us. And we have instituted a series of traffic management measures at the same time as the parking platform, in a way to try and direct people to those routes which are most efficient and have the least impact on those parts of the city that we're wanting to preserve for more pedestrian movement and for more cycling movement.
So, Richard, is it fair to say that as your data providers, NCP, Q Park, are updating their systems with rates and availability, that flows into the City of Manchester's common data platform, such that Parkopedia, Just Park, and all of your other providers that are interacting with consumers, they're getting the exact same information at the exact same time. They don't have their own separate databases active. They are
that's right. Yeah.
pulling live data, so everyone sees the same thing at the same time.
That's right.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's common experience. Yeah. And I think the next slide is just it's just a visualization, really, about how this looks on street. So the functionality enables you to actually visualize where the car park is as well, and in a much easier way of visualizing things. So you visualize the curbside and you visualize where you're going in a way that links together to GIS systems and other things. So that's still to come, but that's certainly where we want to end up. So it's all about trying to make the parking experience as easy as possible, but to view it very much as part of our overall transport policy and strategy, which, as I say, is about creating a more user-friendly city. Especially in the current crisis, we are doing quite a lot to actually repurpose streets make more space available for people to walk. And we've taken some emergency action only this weekend to actually give back space. So that all needs to be factored into the information that's available to the citizen, and the parking platform enables us to certainly helps us with that as well.
And maybe to help provide some context to this drawing, because I found this to be very interesting, what was being shown here. It's not just about rates or availability. This is also showing what are the operating restrictions, or how specific roadways or areas, what are the rules, so that the city of Manchester can communicate out the current rules for a specific area. So maybe it's a no parking zone, maybe it's a loading or unloading zone, etc. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. And yeah, all our intention in due course is for all of our traffic regulation orders and all of our regulatory measures to be integrated into this, so that people get the full picture about where they can drive, where they can't drive. And it's being used as an active part of curbside management, as well as simply a parking tool. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what's so interesting about what you're doing, because you've taken it beyond just parking and are thinking about mobility services and other people that may be, if I can use the term, competing for access to that curb space, on who can use it, when can they use it, and to make sure that you are alleviating any conflicts. Yeah, it's very interesting and a fantastic use of the data to make things more efficient. So I want to thank both of you for sharing the innovative stuff that I think both of your cities are doing to kind of lead the way and to push the envelope around the use of data to make things better for your citizens and for the companies and entities in your cities as well. It's really exciting to see. And more importantly, it's beyond just the idea of a concept. These are things that are actually being done, and the results are being shown. Mike, I mean, your slides did a fantastic job of showing the improvements that your city has already realized just by doing some of the initial steps to share data.
Thank you.
So with that, as we all know, data is very valuable when it can be shared. And I think Mike and Richard have both demonstrated that through their projects within their cities. But that sharing of data requires common definitions. And that's really the focus of the Alliance for Parking Data Standards, and the efforts that it has focused on is to have a common way of defining terms, and then providing structure, common structures on how to share that data. And by doing that, we're going to reduce the cost and friction of sharing data with those common structures, so that we can spend less time trying to get two systems to talk to each other and more time figuring out how can we deliver more services to our partners, to our citizens, etc. So where can you get more information on the Alliance for Parking Data Standards? Well, if you visit this website, you can request the actual data standards. As I said, our next version is being released this month, May 2020. There will also be a frequently asked questions page there that you can engage various people who are helping to support the creation of the standard. In the next 3 months, we will be publishing an API framework. Again, these are our suggested methods for sharing data. There will be a website where you can download and access API documentation, suggested documentation that should help you to accelerate your work, and also to be able to comment on the existing API frameworks and propose new frameworks as well. Look for upcoming events and webinars on the Alliance for Parking Data Standard information, and feel free to reach out to us at the email if you have any questions, or follow us on the social media links listed below. Richard and Mike, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you joining me here to talk about the value of data and to share what your cities are doing. Thank you for everyone for listening to our presentation on how APDS data standards can improve your operation. Have a great day.